about segmented wood turning. We're going to have two presentations, very, very different ways to do segmented wood turning. I'm going to talk first about how I do it. These are some examples of the work that I've done. One of the questions is, why would you want to do segmented wood turning? And I think the main thing is you can make stuff pretty much any size and shape. You can see here very large, very small. Another advantage is that when you're working with this, it's almost all face grain. There's almost no end grain, and that's a problem when you're trying to work the material, when you're trying to finish the material. This turns out pretty smooth all the way through. So that's one of the advantages. Another thing is you can use different woods because you're gluing stuff together. Because you're gluing stuff together, you can vary the pattern by using different types of wood. So those are some advantages. There are also some disadvantages. Disadvantages, people are doing turning. Usually they can go in the shop, they can make something in about 2 hours. In the case of this, you have to glue things together, so you have to let the glue dry. So it's going to take you days and days, particularly if you make something very large. And so that's something that people don't like. I like it because I can work for 2 hours in the shop, come back the next day, work for 2 hours. I don't have to worry about taking a day off or whatever. But the main things are, and when I made this list, I said, I don't even know why I got started because it seems daunting, but you got things you got to do. You've got to make very precise angle cuts. How do you do that? Then you got to make these pieces and you got to put them all together. You got to know what kind of pieces to make and how they fit together. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And then the last thing is, how do you get this information? I went on a website and the website showed me how to make a salad bowl. I made about 5 of these and said, now what do I do? And so you can go online and you can get different types of instructions. You have to pay for them, or you can buy software. But if you buy the software, you got to figure out how to use it. I'd have to ask my kids how to use it. So I came up with a method where I could actually do the calculations, and I think the average 6th grader could probably do the math. So I'll show you how I do it and make it simple that way. And then the last thing is, these things are held together with glue, but they're in rings. And the rings are top to bottom, and the face grain is in the rings. The pieces of the rings are all end grain, kind of this way. So you glue these pieces together, it's all end grain. Not very strong. The face grain here is the strong part. So you got to get the rings flat so things are strong and held together. You got good glue lines. So the question is, how do you do all these things? And I'll try to explain to you at least how I do it. The main thing is to be able to make the angle cuts. This is my miter sled. You can see here it's just a piece of plywood, a board, 2 runners on the bottom, and then I've got a piece of wood I can use to make cuts. I make a piece that looks like this, if you can see it. Fits in this way, cut it on the saw, just a table saw. And when you make these cuts, you got a piece of wood, you make the cut, it cuts. You got your piece, then you take the piece and you flip it over, fit it in, make the next cut. So it's very efficient. You use pretty much the whole piece of wood. So the question is, how do you make this? It probably doesn't cost much because probably in your shop you've got everything you need to do this. But there is a link at the bottom. And this is the site that I use to make this. It tells you how to make almost any angle, any number of rings. I do 12 all the time because I started doing 12, 15 degrees, and why bother making it more complicated for myself? So everything I do is 12, but a lot of people do different angles. So basically you're going to have a board like this that you're going to cut. And if you look online or if you look at a cut list, there are going to be some terms: board width, board thickness, board length. That's pretty straightforward. And then edge length, which you can see up here, is just the longest length here on this cut. So with that, I went online and I found this salad bowl. And you look at that and you say, whoa, there's a lot of stuff up there. And how did they figure out how long the board had to be and what the angle had to be and what the edge length had to be? So as I said, I made a few of these bowls and made some variation on the theme, and then it's sort of like, okay, now what do I do? So what I've come up with is a simplified method that I can make pretty much anything I want to. And I'll show you how I did this. All I do is take a piece of graph paper. What you've got here is this bowl. If you use that cut list, you can make this bowl. It's pretty straightforward. So the question is, how do you come up with a shape? Well, I just look around. I have my camera with me, or I take my phone with me. If I see something that looks interesting and say I want to make it, just make a picture and transfer it to a piece of graph paper. In the case of this bowl, I had a lathe that was 12 inches, so this bowl is 12 inches in diameter. That's as much as I can make. So if you look up here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but maybe number 3 just gives you an idea of a ring. You're going to make rings that you're going to pile up and glue together. I know that it's going to be 12 inches in diameter, but I know this part of it's going to be 10 inches from looking at my graph. And so I just take that 10 inches and divide it by 3.6, and that gives me my edge length. So I've already got one piece of information. I multiply that by 12, that gives me my board length, because I'm not going to use a full 12 pieces. The way they're angled, you actually use less than the full 12 times that. So you get 12 or 13 pieces easily out of that. And then the only question is, because I know my thickness, I've already got that 1 inch, how wide do I make that board? And if you look here, it's 10 inches wide at the top of that ring, and it's 8 inches at the bottom, so it's a 2-inch differential. But because you have 2 sides, it really only has to be 1 inch thick to make that. But obviously 1 inch, especially when you've got something like this, which is a little bit convoluted, isn't enough, so I just add 3/4 of an inch. So if you look up on the cut list on number 3, it's 1 3/4 inches. So I just do that over and over and over, come up with a cut list, and it probably took me less than 2 hours to cut all these pieces using my table saw and jig. So with not a whole lot of money and not a whole lot of expense, because it's just pencil and paper basically, I get that far along. So the next question is, what do? You got to glue it up. You've got these individual pieces. You're going to glue them up and make rings. The first step. How do you make the rings? Well, there are really a couple of methods to do it, but the main thing I find is when I put the rings together, your table saw is never going to be exactly 90 degrees. You've got your saw blade sticking up, but it's always going to be off just a tiny bit, maybe a 1/10 of a degree, maybe a 1/2 degree. But if you just flip the rings over, or the pieces over, you'll find that they fit together better one way or the other. So that's a little tip to put the rings together. And there are 2 methods that people use. You can either use a band clamp, try to glue the whole thing up, or sometimes things don't fit together as well as you'd like them to, in which case you can just take half the pieces and put them together, make 2 half rings, put them on a flat surface with a piece of sandpaper and sand them flat so that the joints fit together well. Either one of those methods works well. The main thing is you're working with end grain. Since you're working with end grain, you need a lot of glue. And you all think, well, we're woodworkers, we've learned over time, don't put too much glue in a joint, because if you put too much glue in a joint, you get trouble down the road. The nice thing about this is every surface here, whether you're going to use a chisel on the lathe or you're going to sand it flat, every surface is going to be somehow treated so you can put all the glue you want on. It's just like, whoa, finally I get to use all the glue I want. It's going all over the place, don't worry about it. And after a couple hours, you can flatten your rings, which amounts, again, to getting it smooth so you get a good joint. As far as putting the rings together, I say wait at least 24 hours. I don't know if it was here or down in Florida, a guy came up and said, gee, I'm looking at all this stuff you make, but it doesn't work. And I said, what do you mean it doesn't work? He said, I tried it, it doesn't work. So, well, what did you do? He said, well, I waited 2 or 3 hours, and when I put it on that lathe, it fell apart. So, usually I use a sanding disc to flatten the rings, and you're probably thinking, well, he told me we don't have to spend a whole lot of money, and now he's got this sanding disc. That's another couple $100. But the reality is, if you have a lathe, you've got a sanding disc. You can just take a faceplate, take a piece of plywood, and put a sandpaper over it, and you've got your sanding disc. So it really doesn't cost you much money at all. But you flatten the rings, you glue them together. You can see a setup for gluing. And then it's pretty close to being time to turn. So the question becomes, Do you put all the rings together and then turn them? Or do you put a couple rings on and turn that and then put another ring on? If you're making something like this, obviously, it's going to be hard to get your chisel down in to something that big. So you got to pay attention to how long is my chisel, where's my tool rest, where can I put it? If you got something like this, it's going to be really hard to try to get down inside and turn it unless you do it ring by ring or a couple rings at a time. And that's why it takes a long time to do this. If I do it one ring at a time and I've got 6 or 7 rings, it's going to take me 6 or 7 days. But on the other hand, that doesn't bother me because I'm only going to be working for a couple hours a day. Come in, glue up a ring, put another ring that's been glued up on, turn it, come back the next day, do the same thing. So that's pretty much the technique. If you put all your rings together at once, you better get them centered. If you don't, you get an explosion. It's happened to me, so be careful there.
How do you get them centered so that the center of that one and the center of that?
What's it? Repeat the question.
The question was, how do you get them centered? Well, I work with 12 segments. So the nice thing about 12 segments is I can divide it by 4, so I've got a line coming through this way, a line coming through this way. So I can alternate the rings and line them up with the other rings or line them up with the center and get pretty close. But my suggestion is if you're getting more than just a few rings, maybe you're making a bowl like this, glue them all up at once. You got something bigger like this or like this, it's probably better to add them one at a time because otherwise you're going to get off center and then you're going to have a big problem. Roy?
If you're a little sloppy like I am, it doesn't matter whether the rings, I use fairly wide pieces to start with. So that gives me lots of room for mistakes of stacking them up.
Like I say, I normally add 3/4 of an inch. If I added 2 inches, I could probably do anything I wanted. It's a matter of how much wood you want to use. That's a good suggestion. So I think the last question is, what do you do with the base layer? I got some old wood-turning magazines, the very start, and the guys said, oh, we're making segmented turnings, and we're trying to make segment for the bottom. If you try and do that, it's got to be extremely precise. Really, really difficult to do. Problem is, once you do that, you're going to find that after 6 months or a year, that's going to open up. Those joints always open up. The recommendation was to go with very thin layers of wood and a few layers to do that. I found, why bother? I'm just going to put a piece of solid wood on here. It's a lot easier. People say, well, there's seasonal movement, won't that fall apart? Well, I've got some that are 10 years old, they're still fine, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. If you use CA glue to try to speed up the process, that's probably not a good idea because CA glue is not permanent. It will at some point fall apart. But in the case of a bowl like this, I got a bottom piece that's solid. I just put a face plate on it. The screws stick down, so I just reverse it, turn out the bottom. You can't tell how I did it, and it's really simple. Much easier than trying to make a bottom that's got something like this pattern. This was kind of a hybrid. I don't do this anymore because it's a pain. But anyway, that is pretty much it. If you've got questions, be happy to entertain me.
You said don't use CA glue, but what kind of glue do you use? Does Titebond?
I use Titebond too. I
Okay.
find that works well for me. I haven't switched away from it.
If you're not fast at it, you want to use a slow setting glue. Because Titebond original, I think, sets up a little faster, doesn't it, than Titebond 2?
Yeah, I think Titebond 2 is a little bit more water resistant. I think that helps with the longevity of it. One of the things I will say is, if you think about it, whenever you glue things together, the glue's got water in it. The water's going to expand the wood. So if you take something like this and make a bowl one day, you sand it, you finish it, you're going to find out that that wood is shrinking around the glue lines, and you're going to be able to feel the glue lines after a while. So the best advice, if you can be a little bit patient, is wait a day or two at least before you sand and finish the bowl, or whatever you make. So any questions?
For some of the longer, skinnier ones, when you chuck the base, when you're turning the outside, do you bring tailstock up at all? Do you use like a jam tailstock?
I do tailstock if I reverse. When I reverse, and the question was, do you ever use a tailstock on these pieces, especially the long ones? When I reverse these to take the bottom out, I certainly use a tailstock. For something like this, and I've made ones that are even taller, but I use a faceplate, I always thought I'm going to have to bring up a tailstock after a while. I found with things that are quite long, I haven't had to use that, but in the case of this one, I did it in 2 pieces. I think the glue line is here. I think that's where I connected them. But I've had some that go out about a foot, and I have not run into problems. I expected I would run into problems, but that hasn't been my experience, at least using a faceplate. Roy?
When I don't know whether you have a system about gluing pieces. I glue them in pairs first, and I lay them on a piece of formica and just rub them together, and then they're easy to get loose from the formica when you
Yeah.
finally want to glue up the whole stack.
Yeah, I use glass plates. I got pieces of flat glass.
Yeah.
If you don't put something underneath, it's a problem. I find I go to Klingspor and get 12-inch sanding discs. They're adhesive. When I take the backing off, that stuff is perfect for small rings. For big rings, I use stuff like, I forget what that Klingon type wrap that you use. It's not saran, but it's Preston steel or something like that. That works fairly well. And if it gets really messy, you just ball it up and throw it away. So, but if I do it on glass, it'll stick to the glass, and then I have to scrape the glue off. So that's a good point. Anything else? Yeah, the question was this set of rings. This set of rings is Tom's. This stuff is mine from small to large, but yeah, Tom is going to tell you about a totally different.
Those are not my rings.
These?
Yes, them are.
Yeah, those are the ones he was pointing to. So, if there are no further questions, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. This is just a picture. I don't even have, I only have one of these bowls myself anymore, so they're gone. There's advantages and disadvantages. Number one, it doesn't take much wood. You use most of the wood when you go into making these. Very efficient, quick to make. You can get the curved designs in your bowls, and that was all made out of just straight material. By cutting it at an angle and in a circle, you make it look like curved. Rings can be turned to make repeating pictures. So the top left one there, the one that looks more like a checkerboard, is probably the best bowl I've made as far as everything matching up. Another thing on that bowl, it's the only bowl that I made out of all of them, I didn't have to lave end grain. I made me 2 boards, 3.5 by 7 inches long, and I cut wedges. And that moved all the end grain to the outside and made turning of it real easy. This bowl here was just 2 pieces of 1/4-inch material glued together in rings. Pretty well understand how that would look. The top one on this left side, there's too much woven in that bowl. There shouldn't have been that much. And it was just angular pieces and made into a board and cut my rings. The glue up can be tricky. If 26, 27 degrees angle, a rubber band will stay on. Make it a little bit steeper and that rubber band will stay on it. Then you got angled material trying to tighten together with a clamp or something. I haven't got that perfected, but it's a real problem. The angles have got to be right. If your angles get off, you're going to have stair steps on the side of your bowl. You'll have to turn it down. I do have one bowl I'll be showing you later where we had some problems. This here is a start of a bowl. I had 2 pieces of material, just some stuff laying in the shop, nothing special, ash, and this piece will be cut just like this is here. Then you'll have 2 halves of bowl and glue them back together. It's quick. It sounds difficult, but it's quick. I got a old bandsaw. It's a 1/3 horsepower. The blade is 1/4 inch wide, 14 teeth per inch. It's 14 thousandths thick, the blade, so it's a real thin blade. And I've used it on all the bowls made. Now, I think I made about 15 now, and it's still cutting. It works great. The next one, Richard threw this picture in here, which is great. It shows a sled here just to cut circles on a bandsaw. And I've cut a lot of circles similar to that, making gears for clocks. This is part of the jig. It's right here. This is the axle. Real simple, made out of scrap piece of oak and piece of Apaton dowel. This goes down in this hole. Well, what happens here, when we make this board, you find the center, and you also lay out your cutting pattern. It's 3/8 inch wide rings is what I've been making on this. And that's another reason you save a lot of wood. A lot of your rings are a lot thicker. But I'll glue this, super tape this on here, double stick, and that'll stay right on there. I put this down in my jig, I line this up with my bandsaw blade, and then cut it around. I cut 1/2, then I take it out. You can get your tape apart here, put the other on, cut it the same way, and you end up with a double set of them to make one bowl. To change as you move up, you got to keep moving up because of your 3/8 thickness. This here will slide in here, and you just move your ring up 3/8 of an inch. I have visions that's difficult to do, and it's really got to be right. Putting me something out here with a little hand crank, so I can crank it 3 times, and it's 3/8 of an inch moving on it, but I'm not there yet.
Can you hold that up?
Pardon?
Can you hold it up?
Sure. I got it taped in here. It's a wedge shape here. I clamp this down to the table on the bandsaw, tilt my table from flat up to the degrees, have that in there, just turn it around halfway. You got it. Slide this up another 3/8, and you'll get another ring. But again, it's hard. I got some slides. I'm getting kind of ahead of myself here, but that's really cheap. I put 2 different things together to come up with this way to do it. I saw in a scroll saw book where they're cutting them on angles with a scroll saw. Well, I can't imagine cutting through my oak and rings in a scroll saw. And then I got on another page, and I lost it. I don't even know where it is anymore. But a guy had made this type of jig up to cut rings. So I kind of put them 2 ideas together and came up with this. On a scroll saw, though, you don't have to be round. They was making all wavy designs and everything in their bowls, leave the bottom out, and just taking a drum sander to sand their bowls, then glue their bottom on. That's how it works. It's real simple. It looks. I'll probably take, once it's set up, it probably don't take me 10 minutes to cut 10 rings. It goes really quick. Here's the most complicated thing, is get your angle right on your bandsaw. What you got, and once you get that angle, and if you're right on it, you can't change it. If you cut 3 of them and change your angle, you're going to have bad stair sets in your thing. So you're set with that one given angle throughout the whole bowl. What you do is take your ring width, and most of these are 3/8, and divide it by the thickness of the material, 3/4. It'll come up with a number of 0.5. You go to this chart, 0.5095 tells you it's 27 degrees. Now you change the thickness of the material, it'll change your angle. You change the thickness of your ring, it's going to change your angle. So it's got to coordinate together, and once you're there, you're pretty well onto that. And the only way you can change, like I said, to change them, I got a pile, and if anybody wants any of these charts to give you angles here, you're welcome to them. This is this board here. I put some blue tape on it there, so it would show up better here in the picture. That's my cut lines. And you can make the bowl whatever thickness here you want to rim. You could change it to 1/2 inch. Just go back to your chart, it'll give you a little different angle. You can change it. This chart, if you're 3/4 inch thick and you got a 3/4 inch rim, divide them together, you're going to come up with 1. Your chart will tell you it's 45 degrees. So if your thickness of your material, the thickness of the rim is always the same, it'll be 45 degrees. As you see how I'm setting the angle up with a 59-cent protractor that I've had since I think I was in school. But that's how I set it up. I want to talk just a second here about the bandsaw. Like I said, this is an old bandsaw. It's got steel pins lining the blade together, and it's got another set on the bottom. When I set up making one of the bowls down here, the bandsaw blade got out in front of the pin and was over on it, and it kept running. I don't know how, but it did. Well, that messed my angle. Wasn't much, but messed my angle up. And I cut the first ring of the bowl. I was cutting the second cut on the bowl when I discovered, because it stalled out, and it actually pulled my double stick tape loose. That's the only place I've had a problem with that coming loose. There it is, it's all set up. I got a clamp on that corner and that corner. I don't have the other 2 clamps on. There'll be 2 more clamps on there. And I also clamp a little piece of wood on the bottom here to hold that slide in case it should happen to want to move. And just a matter of turning that around there. There you can see me lining it up. You see my marks on there.
Hey, Tom, the taper, does that tighten up as you move it? You got a taper for that slide. I don't quite understand how that works.
Well, there again, this is my first jig, and I now know I can do a lot of improvement on it. But yeah, this is tapered in there. And when I cut this with a bandsaw, it got sloppy. Okay, my angle would have been really my cutting. So I started laying electrical tape on it. Just old black electrical tape, and that's what I filled that in there with. And if I took the tape off, this will slide.
Okay.
It just keeps it from coming up. But I really had no problem with that. This is, well, a ring like this, if not this. What I do, I'll end up with 2 of these. I haven't got the other half cut, it's still there on the board. And I'll hold them together, and the amount of sanding there is just enough. I mean, if I go just back and forth once, that's all I do. Make sure this is clean. It's already square. You got to make sure when you put these 2 halves together, before you do anything else, make sure them are straight and flat. So that's what you're going to be gluing together. If you cut in rings, you got to glue it back together. Everybody was talking a while ago, or gentlemen were talking about deals that resist glue. Of course, everybody knows newspaper don't work well. This green around here, my wife had bought mats. They're little plastic mats to put on your kitchen so you don't cut it with a knife, and they come by this. They got some type of fiber in them. Well, she used the same one all the time, and finally she found some better ones, so she gave them to me. And that green around there, I got a piece of sandpaper just fastened to it. And that green mat, you'll see I use it elsewhere to keep the glue from sticking. And another thing, if you let it set there and glue a long time, say you forget it and let it set all overnight, it's going to be stuck to this green mat too. But you can bend that green mat, and it'll just peel off like unrolled tape right off of that. It works real well as something to keep the glue off of everything else. This is a ring that was glued up. I used a rubber band. It's that ring and that rubber band right there. It looks easy, but it's difficult. It'll want to roll up on you too. But you can kind of hang on to it and work it down. And like I said, if you change the angle of your cut, you get a little steeper, you gotta go, that rubber band won't work at all. There, I'm hand sanding. This is, the face of them has got to be smooth. Now that's what you're going to glue together. And you got your two joints there you glue together. So I spend quite a little bit of time here, and I do quite a bit of sanding on both sides. And 120 sandpaper is excellent surface to glue. Here's my press. Most people call them drill presses. This is just a drill press. I use it all the time. Press that glue joint together. I put dots on the bowls. I found out once I get my glue on them, I'm turning them and everything else, and next thing I don't know the way it should be. So I D them with a row of dots. It just speeds up gluing them up. And I let them set there quite a while, but I don't put them under stress till the next day. Just like Richard was saying, don't get in a rush. It takes time on that glue. That was my last slide. I want to talk a little bit of time about bowls.
Question.
Well,
So that setup there now, part of the time you're turning into grain, right?
most of the time.
So I see that picture. You have all the pieces with looks like side grain on this side. Have you ever tried mixing them up, mixing up the rings as far as the grain is concerned? If you did, what happens?
I could rotate them.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happens, okay, I rotated rings here half, I think a half a lap.
Okay.
This affair I haven't quite got done, hasn't been finished yet, but only turned them like an inch. These two bowls are identical, came out of the same size material. I cut the bottom smaller, and this is bigger. And what I saved here, I set on top, made the ring taller, but it's out of the same material. I had this down here before. This is just plywood. Plywood's, the worst thing about plywood is hard on your cutters. The glue in there is extremely hard. It's melamine glue of some type, and it will dull things. But again, that bowl there is made out of this piece of plywood. That's how bigger it was. I'm jealous of Richard over here because he can make curves. Well, I haven't got that far yet, and I don't know if I ever will be able to make a curve with this type of thing. I'm close, but it isn't a real good curve. But I think if I had a ring to put in there, 3/4 inches of a normal ring, space it out, I could probably smooth that up, take the bottom off, and I probably could make some type of vase. This is the one where the bandsaw got off up there I was talking about, and put stresses on it. And it's affected the depth of these rings laying in here. That's just an ash and cherry. And Here's what I had left of it. What I did on there was make this bowl had flat spaces, and I glued it on and cut them off, and I glued another piece on, and you end up with that material being clear around there. This bowl, I didn't know what I was going to have. It's just looking at it, it's kind of disappointing. Oak and walnut. I just put little walnut squares on each end. Again, this bowl, this is probably the best bowl to build if you're just wanting to build something that's easy. Cut you 4 pieces of material, the same size, make it walnut cherries, something that will contrast. That's all there is 4 pieces of wood in there. And be able to get this bowl out with that 4 pieces of material. This, I haven't got the bowl, but this is the only bowl I made where there's no end grain. The end grain is glued together, where the glue joints are here. This is all flat sawn out here, so it laid real easy. I just glued up 2 halves of the bowl, 1/4 inch walnut and 1/4 inch aspen or something, and then I cut wedges on both pieces, and then flip every other one over. You end up with a checkerboard pattern on the bowl. Plus, I don't have end grain. This is a real simple bowl, cherry and ash. It's flat pieces glued together. Went well. And this is the bowl I'm most proud of. It's just unreal. I still, today, I look at it every once in a while. I just can't understand how I can make that design in this bowl out of this. You just can't think that design would happen, but it did. And there was, my wife Penny helped me a little bit on this. We got playing with the rings, and there was 3 different designs I could make. 3 different patterns in there. So person looks at that, and normal person goes, how in the world did I cut all them pieces? You know, you look out here, you got this diamond, well, inside it's a great big piece in there. How did I cut all them angles? Well, you don't have to making these bowls. Now I want to do some more experimenting with this type of stuff. If you take a flat piece of material, your 7-inch square, glue up a little bit of, put a little ash here, and put a 3/4 inch piece of walnut, then do the same thing on the inside with ash in the middle. When you make a bowl out of that, that thing's going to go like this down in your bowl. And you cut it this way. It's going to make that sagging design. It's really, really neat. That's about all I got. Any questions? You need to try this, because it's really simple. If I can do it, it's got to be simple.